Hi there, this is Solitaire Ronan from Solitaire Ronan Films, and welcome to another random review. And today's random review is Wiliam Castle's Strait-Jacket from 1964, starring Joan Crawford. Now, as you may know on this channel, I love Powerhouse Indicator and the releases. Strait-Jacket is part of their Wiliam Castle Volume 2 box set, and I have to be honest and say that Volume 2 is nowhere near as good as Volume 1. It has Zots, 13 Frightened Girls, and The Old Dark House, all of which are fairly average films. Obviously the extras on them are fantastic. But what makes the set worth getting is Strait-Jacket. This is spine number 101, so it's the last one in the box set by numerical order, and it's a corker. Obviously with Indicator, it's a nice booklet as well as the Blu-ray. This is one of those films Joan Crawford did after whatever happened to Baby Jane. So she was an older lady by that time, and she was getting old crazy lady roles. Indicator also have Berserk, where Joan Crawford is the leader of a circus, where murders start happening. So this one tells the moving story of Joan Crawford, who axe murders her husband in what may be the first role for Lee Majors, the $1 Million Man, and his lover. She's then put into an insane asylum for 20 years, and we pick up the story when she comes out after 20 years to be reunited with her daughter, who is staying in her uncle and aunt's farm, and how she readjusts to life out in the world. The film was also directed and produced by Wiliam Castle. The script was written by Robert Bloch, who's more famous for writing Psycho, which is obviously the Gus Van Sant film. It stars obviously Joan Crawford, who during rehearsals pretty much got the original actress who was going to play her daughter fired. Crawford was at the time married to somebody very high up in Pepsi. There's a couple of examples of product placement where there's 6 packs of Pepsi on show, and in a bizarre twist of casting, her psychiatrist who turns up just checking how she's doing is actually the vice president of Pepsi. So he's not an actor at all. Apparently he couldn't remember lines and they had such a struggle, but he was actually the vice president of Pepsi, believe it or not, but it is a true story. There's also a nice little turn by George Kennedy, who would later win an Oscar for Cool Hand Luke. But here he plays against type. He plays a farmhand who's a bit shady and a bit creepy. We're kind of used to seeing George Kennedy playing good guys, or if you're familiar with the Naked Gun series of films, playing Leslie Nielsen's hapless sidekick. But he's actually quite dark and creepy. I have to say, obviously later in her career, a lot of people kind of like the camp aspect of Joan Crawford's films. Obviously, she had a drinking problem later in life, but in this film, she gives a tremendous performance. She's actually quite moving. There's a scene where she's reunited with her daughter for the first time after 20 years, and it is actually quite moving. Her daughter is a sculptor who has a bust of her head, of Joan Crawford's head, that she did, or as she imagined Joan Crawford to be 20 years earlier. It was actually a real bust that was commissioned by the studios at one point. And as Joan Crawford says, she's changed in 20 years, and there's like tears streaming down her face as she reflects on her past life and what she used to be compared with what she is now. She does kind of leave herself pretty much bare in a lot of these scenes. So it's quite a brave performance, as well as being obviously unintentionally funny in places. The film has a really interesting score. The composer uses the theremin, so you kind of get a sense of like 50s science fiction films, because the theremin was used quite a lot in those 50s science fiction films, those Invaders from Mars and Flying Saucer kind of films. So it has a kind of eerie, strange kind of soundtrack to it. At one point, the daughter, Carol, and Joan Crawford's character Lucy goes out shopping to get outfits, and her daughter convinces her to wear a black wig that makes her look a lot younger. It's a film about, readjusting after coming out of an insane asylum. I'm sure we've all done it. But it's also about aging, and the kind of regrets for your youth, essentially. So the daughter shows Joan Crawford about the farm. She shows her the chickens and mentions butchering, and then goes, and then she goes to the pigs and mentions, we fatten them up before we slaughter them. And it just tries to avoid the subject of axings and slaughtering and butchering in front of her, which is quite funny. But obviously Joan Crawford starts having nightmares about the decapitations, which are handled with the usual Wiliam Castle flair for the subtle. But as Joan Crawford, there's more pressure put upon her, things start going a little wrong. Her psychiatrist turns up to see how she's doing and talks about taking her back to the asylum. But then obviously people start dying, the people that are in Joan Crawford's way start dying. There's a nice subplot with her daughter and her boyfriend or fiance, but his parents don't know yet, and his parents are kind of upper class, and obviously the mother wants to know everything about Joan Crawford and where she was, and that leads to tension. It's one of Wiliam Castle's best films. He has like a true star in the role. The extras in this are really good. There's a commentary. There's a 28-minute appreciation by Jonathan Rigby, who's always excellent. There is a 7-minute interview with Anne Helm, who was the original actress to play Joan Crawford's daughter, in a vignette that's called Joan Had Me Fired. There's an interview with Joan Crawford's publicist, Richard Kahn, and there's a 15-minute documentary about the making of from 2007. And there's also a nice little short of How to Plan a Murder, which was a promotional piece with Robert Bloch and Wiliam Castle. And Robert Bloch does actually take a couple of shots at himself, and there's a couple of Psycho references. Like Robert Bloch suggests that we kill the heroine halfway through, and William Castle's like, "Oh, that's ridiculous. That's just not done." So it's a lovely little tongue-in-cheek promotional piece. There's Joan Crawford wardrobe tests, and a Joan Crawford axe test for a minute. There's also a Super 8 original cut-down version, isolated music and effects track, which Indicator do really well and is often very interesting. And obviously there's a nice booklet inside. I would highly recommend it if you're a fan of Joan Crawford. It's an essential. Again, people might look at it with a more satirical or postmodernist view and have a laugh at it, but Joan Crawford does actually give a moving performance at times during the film. Somebody said in the extras, if it was another film and not like a Wiliam Castle exploitation genre film, should be nominated for an Oscar, because there are really beautiful scenes, but you still have that Joan Crawford power, that Joan Crawford ballsy walk. At one point there's a record playing and she lights a match on the playing record to light a cigarette. The scenes where she's pretending that everything's okay, but she's actually like a nervous wreck, are wonderful. You can probably guess how it ends, but there's just so much fun to be had during its 93-minute runtime. It's just an absolute blast. So, in all honesty, I perhaps wouldn't recommend the Wiliam Castle box set Volume 2 to go rush out and buy. If you can find Strait-Jacket somewhere else. I don't know, maybe if the box set sells out, they might release them individually. And I'd maybe wait for that, but Strait-Jacket certainly is the gem of Volume 2. Wiliam Castle's Volume 1 is an essential purchase as far as I'm concerned. It's got The Tingler, it's got Homicidal, who are two Stone Cold classics. But Strait-Jacket makes Volume 2. It kind of makes up for the other three films, which are just okay. Check out Strait-Jacket. Check out Berserk, which is also an Indicator, starring Joan Crawford in one of her later lady roles. Awesome fun. Just sharpen your axe before you watch it. So thanks very much for watching. Hopefully you'll join me again for more random reviews. Please let me know if you've seen Strait-Jacket and what you think of it. And hopefully we'll see you again. This is Solid Ronan saying farewell.